Dr. Orion Taraban. Thank you so much for joining us today and being, I don't know if you know this, officially the first guest on the Help for Men podcast.
I had no idea.
We
What an
will,
honor. Thanks for having me here,
yes,
Ralph.
yes, thank you. Thank you for coming. For those that don't know, probably everyone watching this knows because most of the people that watch my material and listen to my material and read stuff, they are what we call, and this is no slight against them because I'm raising my hand, I'm one of them, probably more of your anxious persuasion. They have more of the anxious, preoccupied attachment, to use, the vernacular. And they love to watch material and learn as much as they can about the world of relationships from a male perspective. And they YouTube like crazy. They podcast like crazy. They read every book and course, and they do everything. So if you're in that world and you're a man and you're taking in all that information, Orion Taraban's face has come up more than a few times,
It's
especially here
possible.
recently. Is it my imagination, or has your exposure bumped up quite a bit in the last, I don't know, 6 months or so?
Hmm. Well, the channel has been growing pretty consistently for the last 6 months, and it really took off about a year and a half ago. Things are going very well. I just finished my first book, and I'm going to be doing a lot more media appearances in the coming weeks and months, and so I'm sure that will help to grow the thing even further. But yeah, things seem to be moving fairly swimmingly these days. May that continue.
Yeah, I would say I- I've been following you for quite a while. I'm probably one of your early followers, simply because I'm very, very interested as a coach, counselor type person in the world of psychology and learning as much as I can without calling myself a psychologist. And your material came up, quite a bit when I was researching that on YouTube and so forth. Psychacks, for those that don't know, YouTube, and do a search for Psychacks. And I'm sure that has come up, like I say, on your algorithm, on your feed for guys listening to this quite a bit already. But your stuff is very, very good, very, very interesting. So when I then saw your face show up in another YouTube channel a couple of them that I watched quite a bit. One was Modern Wisdom with Chris, last name
Chris
Williamson.
Williamson. Mm-hmm.
Williamson, yes, love his show. And Soft White Underbelly. I think that's the one that probably, my mom watches that one. So for her
And I wonder
to
what your
see
mom would
that,
have
that's a big
thought.
thing.
So that was one of my more controversial appearances. I
Yes,
divided the audience somewhat, especially the first talk
I
I
was
gave.
going to say that if you do a search for Orion Taraban on Google, one of the first things that comes up is a discussion on Reddit. You familiar with Reddit?
I've heard of it. I don't use it personally, but
Just a giant discussion forum with little sub discussions under it. And one of the big things that comes up is people discussing your appearance on Soft White Underbelly.
mm.
And probably 99% of it was a lot of people saying, "What the hell is this?" Which is interesting. We'll get into this because I get a lot of that myself. And this leads into your book, which is approaching the the concept, the topic of relationships from a, dare we say, cold. That's probably the wrong term. More analytical, pragmatic point of view.
Pragmatic,
Trying to,
rational,
yeah,
objective. It's certainly
objective.
not
So
touchy
script.
feely, lovey dovey advice about how to make relationships work.
But as you know, the core of the world of relationships, especially in the modern day interpretation, is everything lovey dovey.
Well, there's a number of reasons for that. I think it's because that's the kind of language that women tend to resonate with. And we know that women are by far the largest proportion of consumers of psychological services and anything that falls broadly under the domain of self help, like self help books and seminars and videotapes. And catering to that communication style and those expectations is actually very good marketing and good for business. You can even consider it something as an audience capture of the industry. Now, that said, if it just made sense to communicate better and love each other more, I think we would have figured that out by now. I think that our we wouldn't be experiencing the modern relationship crisis that we're currently going through. Those seem to be things that can be done. But in my experience, it's not true or even often the case that people end up with the ones who love them the most. I think that kind of coming into romantic relationships through the lens that love is the most important value that keeps people together is a bit naive. And if people really want a fighting chance of having good, sustainable, healthy, fulfilling relationships, they need to learn about the things that actually go into making relationships thrive and function.
Which they can learn more about in your book. And the book is titled, which is, it is available for sale right now. The book is titled The Value of Others, with the subtitle of, this is a big subtitle,
It
Orion,
is.
Understanding the Economic Model of Relationships to Get and Keep More of What You Want in the Sexual Marketplace. Using those last two words. That's a dog whistle for a lot of people. The sexual marketplace. A lot of people roll their eyes and go, here we go. But again, we're stripping away a lot of the romance and everything from it. We're looking at it from a very pragmatic, rational, objective point of view. It's a sexual marketplace.
Well, I actually think that it's more appropriate to call the vast majority of relationships in this domain sexual relationships as opposed to romantic relationships. That really gets to the core of it. In fact, traditionally, romantic relationships don't have sex in them. Like, there's a chapter about the origin of romantic love in the book, and it comes from the ancient practice of the chivalric Christian order of knights in medieval Europe. And one of the things that the knights would do is they would choose a lady to serve as the representation of the feminine aspect of the divine, to which to devote their efforts and their quests and etc. And to ensure that there would remain a sort of obstruction between the two of them perpetually, so that the game of chivalry could continue on for as long as possible, knights always chose women who were married to other men. This is something that is often not remembered in the course of history, is the knights on the romantic quests were devoting their services to women who were married to other men. And the idea there was it created this barrier to actually acting on a sexual dimension of the relationship, which in the romantic tradition would have sullied the relationship. It wouldn't be as pure, it wouldn't be as noble, it wouldn't be as loving, because it would be tainted with this corporeal, carnal desire. Okay? Now, there was certainly no problem with the corporeal, carnal desire tainting the marriage, because, of course, we would presume that the lady was actually engaging in sexual intimacies with her husband, whom she might have chosen or was chosen for her for a vast other suite of circumstances besides who loved her the most or who was most devoted to her, which could have been that night.
Interesting. Very interesting. This is such a multi-layered, multifaceted thing, the world of relationships. The more you dig into it, the more complex it gets. And it is, when talked about, the majority of my audience are probably anxious individuals. This is digging into the world of relationships, digging into kind of, to use the old term, peering behind the curtain of what's really going on. Mm-hmm. It's rocket fuel for the anxious nature. It's potentially. This isn't as cut and dry and simple as I thought it was.
Relationships are extremely complex.
Extremely complex. And dare I say, if you're of a certain bent, the more complex it becomes, the more nefarious it becomes. It becomes it's not as wholesome, pure, loving, and sweet as what I thought. There's actually not so nice things behind the scenes. Some of it.
Well, that's because the people involved in relationships aren't so wholesome, nice, and sweet through and through either. They have darknesses, they have shadows, they have selfishnesses and greeds and lusts, and they have baggage from their childhood and previous relationships, and all that needs to be navigated in a culture where there's constant temptation and competition intrasexually. I mean, it's very, very hard to do.
Mm-hmm. And are you of the opinion that now in the modern day age, it is more difficult than ever?
It's both easier and harder. And paradoxically, part of the reason why it's harder is because it's easier. It's like, on some level,
interesting.
We know that dating apps seem to be both very helpful and conducive to helping people meet each other. Like, for example, 10 years ago, I think around 1 in 5 people, so around 20%, met online. And from the year the statistics are most recently available, it's exceeded 50%. So it's gone from 20 to 50% in about a decade. That is a 250% increase. That's enormous. So more and more people are meeting online. But we also know across that same time period of 10 years, there has been a significant reduction in the number of total relationships that have been initiated. So whereas more relationships are being initiated through dating apps, fewer overall relationships are being initiated. And I think there's a number of reasons why that's true.
Mm-hmm. And it is something like the easy availability it's hard to say, of online dating, the courtship process being kind of short circuited, if you will, does that lend itself to a culture where a relatively small number of individuals are engaging in all of the sexual activity? In
Oh
other
yeah.
words, it used to be, this big portion of men were getting laid, to be crass, and now it's a relatively small portion of the tippy top of the pyramid, of the hierarchy, so to speak.
Yeah, especially on dating apps, which is skewed so disproportionately towards the visual and the superficial.
Yeah.
Like if
Hmm.
you have good optics, you can clean up on dating apps. And if you don't, even if you are a loving, great communicator with lots of money and a great experience and a doctorate, it's like it's going to be more challenging. It's not impossible, of course. You need to know how to use these tools, which is really what they are. And if you engage with them in the wrong way, you're just going to end up feeling burnt out and frustrated. But if you engage with them in the right
Mm.
way, it actually does facilitate optionality in a way that might have been unprecedented even 10 years ago. But even more than dating apps, you have Instagram and social media. Instagram is the dating
Mm.
app par excellence in 2024, if you know how to use it properly. Of course, some people are just using it to post their pictures of their dinner, but other people are using it to access pretty much every single or not so single person on the planet. And that's part of what's
Hmm.
made relationships so difficult is there used to be smaller ponds. Like it used to be enough that you could be a relatively big fish in a relatively small pond. You could be, you know, the you can be a successful small business owner in your small town, and that could be the most compelling relationship opportunity. You could be the most eligible bachelor in your town up until recent memory. Nowadays, though, it's not enough. There are no small ponds anymore. Everyone is swimming in just one gigantic ocean. And so, on some level, men are competing for the girl next door against every other man on the planet. And women are competing for the most eligible bachelor in their town against every other woman on the planet. This is
Mm.
already happening, but a lot of people aren't aware of this yet. They're going to become
Mm.
increasingly aware of it in the coming years.
There was a gentleman on Twitter that I follow, and I apologize, I don't know his full name. I believe his name is Alex or Alexander, um, a researcher into this type of stuff. And one thing his research uncovered was that there is this thought that uh, a very small portion of men are getting access to all these women, and then in turn, all these women are going after the one relatively small portion of men. And he says his research seems to show actually it's a little simpler than that. A relatively small number of women and a relatively small number of men are very promiscuous, and they're having relationships with each other and basically eschewing everybody else. So the two lucky
Maybe,
groups, so to speak,
maybe.
are in
I don't think it's just the
yeah.
promiscuous people who are hooking up with each other, though that could be the lion's share of the hooking up.
Mm.
That makes sense. But I think that you can be somebody with a very low body count as a woman, for instance, and through a social media app like Instagram, contact a very successful, potentially promiscuous man and enter into a sexual relationship without very much to do. And that person
Mm.
would be hard pressed to be considered promiscuous if she only has two or three partners at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is that because
Yeah.
most men will have sex with most women, but most women won't have sex with most men, women often, if they're attractive enough, they can simply just make themselves available. And it's never been easier to make yourself available to even very successful or even famous men who would be significantly gate kept in the past, even 10 years ago. Like it would be very hard to get access to movie stars or athletes or celebrities. Now they all have social media. You can slide into their
Mm-hmm.
DMs. Some of these
Mm-hmm.
guys are getting hundreds or thousands of requests a day. Like, and some of them are actually getting authentic marriage proposals. And of course, it's even more disproportionate in the other direction. If you're an
Oh
attractive
yeah.
woman, then visual platforms like Instagram significantly favor you. Like, it's not uncommon for a very successful, attractive man to have 20,000 followers on Instagram, but it's certainly not uncommon for an attractive woman to have 2 million. And
Yeah.
if she has 2 million
Absolutely.
followers, that algorithm is going to put her in front of even more people. And now she has this constant catchment of male attention. It's going to be very difficult for those men to slide into her DMs and get something going on, but it's certainly possible if
Mm-hmm.
you're offering a compelling enough opportunity for a relatively attractive woman to slide into a man's DMs who might be
Mhm.
successful, famous, or wealthy, and potentially make something happen.
One way to frame this is that we have created this construct of this internet-based dating platform, which elevates certain shallow aspects of the mating game that weren't so elevated before.
Mhm.
Or another way to look at it is the technology and so forth stripping away a lot of the nonsense and allowing a more how to put this a more capitalistic system of mating, as opposed to a more socialistic system of mating, where in the past it was, here's your wife, here's your husband, here's your wife, here's your husband. And now it's, boy, now you got to get in the gladiator ring, so to speak, and battle it out. And you have a lot of people to fight up against. And, thank you, internet and everything else. Just two different ways of looking at it.
I think it's a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
both in that I think that the current technological developments are not creating these dynamics so much as they are revealing them and potentially
Yes.
exaggerating certain aspects of what has predated these developments for thousands and thousands of
Mm,
years. It's not
well
like
put. Yeah.
physical attractiveness suddenly became important with the advent of Instagram. It arguably may have become more important given the optical and visual nature of the social media platforms where people are meeting each other, but it certainly didn't create that criterion in people in their mating and dating selection process. And that said, the game is constantly evolving. This is not the end state. Like the game will go on
Mm,
long after you and I are gone, and it will continue to evolve in ways that you and I can't predict. But my kind of philosophy is that no matter what the situation might be, there is generally always a way to win. There's always a way to thrive. It's like it's not often talked about, but more new American millionaires were made in 1929 in the stock market crash and during the Great Depression than in any other previous period in American history or since. So there's always opportunity, no matter what the global conditions might be. You just have to be willing
mm-hmm,
to adapt and to act sometimes against the crowd and the movement of the
mm-hmm.
majority. That's how you seize opportunities.
There you go. The game has changed.
The game has changed,
And
yes.
I have so many men, in their 40s and 50s and so forth, post divorce, who have been playing by a game, so to speak, a book of rules for decades with their ex-wife. And the book of rules to them included, I have a really good job. I have a nice, healthy 401k. I'm a good dad. And it kind of ends there.
Yeah.
And they take that into the marketplace, and the marketplace just kind of yawns and says, "Hmm." And they meet a lot of women that are like, I'm well to do myself. I drive a Mercedes. I have a career. I'm the vice president of so and so at this company.
Sure.
What else do you have, mister? And they go, I don't know. My entire identity has been father and provider. Beyond that, not a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get frustrated because they sometimes are on a dating app for a year and they get nothing. 2 years, nothing. It's like, well, writing is on the wall. You're a certain product with a certain packaging, and people are passing you up to get something else off the shelf. Perhaps it's time to wake up to the paradigm. The paradigm has shifted. We're in a different world now.
Oh, it's a very different world. I often do consultations with guys who are divorced after 20, 30 years of marriage sometimes. And I can't imagine. I mean, their dating predates the internet, let alone social
Mm,
media.
mm-hmm.
It would be like if you were in prison for the last 30 years and suddenly you came out to see what society was like. I mean, how overwhelming and alien must that feel to some extent? And the things that used to matter, it's not like they don't matter at all anymore, but the priorities have shifted and the way of doing business has changed. And the expectations of both men and women have shifted significantly in just the last 10 years, let alone the last 20 or 30. To use a
Mm-hmm.
kind of a military metaphor, which often resonates with guys, it's like these men, they're like the French after World War I. World War I was dominated by trench fighting, as you'll recall. And so to prevent that from ever happening again, they built the Maginot Line, this long wall between them and Germany to keep out the potential future German aggression. But over the next 20, 25 years, warfare had changed significantly that the Maginot Line was completely irrelevant. And all the Germans did was just go through Berlin and come down the other side. And now the French were trapped against their own protector. I mean, it was a total ludicrous rout in that case. But how would they know Like they just assumed that warfare was going to stay the same, which they frankly should have known that would not be the case because that's never been the case. They just didn't know exactly how it was
Mm,
going to evolve. Nothing ever stays the same. And the people who win are generally the ones who are able to best flow with the demands of the time and to recognize opportunities as they present themselves.
very well put. Very well put. In fact, you have some excellent lines. I read a little bit into the book, and the book is available on Amazon right now in paperback, Kindle format, as well as Audible, correct? Audio
That's
format.
right.
And
Mm-hmm.
you can get all of them on Amazon. And the book is titled The Value of Others by Orion Taraban. And I highlighted some quotes here that I love right off the bat in the intro. Despite all of our modern pretensions to liberality and open mindedness, we still largely treat sexual versus romantic relationships like medieval corpses. They're imbued with a sacredness that makes their dissection transgressive. So,
Mm-hmm.
just what I said right at the top of this, people don't like you getting in and dissecting and looking at machinations of human behavior and how much biology and evolutionary psychology and so forth dictates what it is we do and how much of this is free will and romance and finding your soulmate and so forth. People just bristle at that and just this is antithetical to everything I've ever thought about in relationships. I don't like this, and it's very very difficult for a lot of people to swallow. And it's very difficult to balance this newfound knowledge with, again, hope, I guess, for a relationship.
Well, it can be. It can be difficult to swallow, especially if you have certain ideologies or beliefs. Like, I think medicine in particular was put back hundreds of years because of this, let's say, religious prescription about dissecting corpses. And how else are we going to understand how systems work if we're not able to actually observe them, if not live, because we didn't have the scans and the technology to at the time, at least post mortem? And that squeamishness put back the advent of legitimate medicine for hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, when you first opened up a corpse, I wasn't there, but I can imagine if you were the first person to dissect a body, you would probably feel hopeless because you'd open that body up and think, what the hell is this? Like this green goop? And how does that go with this thing over here? And I have no idea. This is just extremely complex. I kind of want to put the skin back on and unsee what I've seen because I despair of my ability to understand something that's so complex. But that's the nature of the human body. And
Mm,
maybe the first response to coming into contact with that reality is a form of hopelessness at a awareness of the complexity of the situation. But with diligent study and careful observation and examination, that hopelessness should dissipate as you get some level of understanding of what you're dealing with. But in the beginning, there's always hopelessness. When you're starting to learn a new language or start a new career path, you're going to be inept, you're going to be incompetent, you're going to compare yourself to your more successful, experienced peers or colleagues. Okay, so what are you going to do? Give into the despair, or are you going to increase your competence, improve your experience, and like move forward until that hopelessness organically dissipates into a form of authentic confidence? Like there's no other way around it.
exactly. Sticking with the corpse metaphor, I think the first reaction would probably be one to retch and having
Oh, it's
very real
disgusting too.
disgust response.
I mean, I'm sure
Yeah,
it
disgust
smells
response.
bad. There's all kinds of nasty, foul
You have
liquids
to
and
get past that.
putrefactions.
Yeah,
But it's also true if you look too closely at anyone, including yourself. Like no one is that squeaky clean through and through.
no. Another great line to follow along with this theme from the book, The Value of Others. Our popular conceptualization of relationships is based on a model equivalent to the humoral theory of medicine. It is a metaphysical mishmash of demonstrated ineffectiveness. And humoral, for those that don't know, what late 1800s, early 1900s, we used to think medicine used to think that the body was a system of humors of bile and phlegm and blood and all these liquids combine and work in concert with each other and cause disease
Mm-hmm.
and mental illness, and it was ridiculous, right? But that's what medicine thought for
Well, at
many
least
many
it was
years.
something. You know, you had to give people some
Hmm.
level of hope that somebody had some purchase over this uncomfortable and distressing condition, which is illness. And before that, it was just shamanistic practices, which still exist today in the let's say, placebo effect, is that we don't have tribal headsmen with feathers and who are rolling their eyes back on their head, going into seizures and calling the spirits, but we have white lab coats, and we have medical equipment, and we have Latin names and strange sounding prescriptions. And a lot of this is the modern contemporary equivalent to the theater and the performance that goes into the placebo effect that makes even objectively effective medicines more effective.
It's funny you mentioned that. My wife is a physician. She's a surgeon, and I've known her for 10 years now. Wife number 2. And there's one thing that has opened my eye. She has opened my eyes to getting into her world and meeting all her fellow physicians. Is before meeting her and getting into that world, I was like everyone else. Ooh, physician. And when doctor says fill in the blank, that is gospel. That my doctor says I should take this, I shouldn't take that. My doctor says to stay away from that. But now when you realize they're all humans, and they go to YouTube and figure out how to do something just like everybody else. How do I tape an ankle? Go to YouTube.
Well, not just that they're
and
human, but they also have probably been very busy for the last 10 to 20 years. And the state of medicine has changed significantly in the last 2 decades.
They can't know everything.
They can't and they are too busy to update their knowledge base. I know they have to take CEs just like I do, but oftentimes those aren't sufficient to actually start a new line of inquiry, especially if what you've known has worked good enough in the past. You're going to keep using that tool for as long as you can get away with using it, probably.
In our world, dealing with men, a lot of men are jumping on the world of testosterone therapy. And they will go to their, just as an aside, and they will go to their doctor and their family doctor, their general practitioner, and say, I would like to go on this. And sometimes they are laughed out of the room, like, please get out of here. You're not a he-man. Come on. Other times they are prescribed something that is so far out in left field that people like myself and others who are somewhat knowledgeable in the area say, what in the world? And you hear those stories again and again and again, and you get appreciation. These are just humans. They make mistakes. But lab coat, doctor, stethoscope.
Well, also the idea that a doctor, especially a GP, should be an expert in everything. Like no matter who walks through the door.
It's ridiculous.
I mean, who was the patient before the testosterone man? It might have been a child who had swallowed a pen. And then the one after that is a hypochondriac who's been in there 30 times. And later the day, it's somebody who is actually going to have to be diagnosed with cancer for the first time. It's like, it's all over the map. It's very difficult to be an expert in many different things. It's hard enough to be an expert in one thing. Impossible.
But back to concept of the dating and mating game, as it were. We can talk about the concept of game. Another line from the book: the game of mating and dating is fundamentally governed by a synthesis of psychological and economic principles. Boy, when you throw the word economic in there and start putting in economic theory and so forth, that really puts a cold spin on it, so to speak, and really dissects it and brings it down to a baseline level of ones and zeros.
It can. In the footnote to that line, I think I mentioned how the word economic can rub people the wrong way, but precisely, in my opinion, because it has overt associations with money. And so it feels very materialistic, if not exploitative. And I offer a different definition that comes from, I think, von Mises, who was a very brilliant economist of the Vienna School in the early 20th century. And that it's really about, economics is really about how to make decisions using scarce resources. We only have so much time in the day. We clearly do some things and not other things. How do we make those decisions? Why do we prioritize some things over other things? Well, this is more meaningful. This is more important. This is more urgent. Those are all economic decisions because they have to do with the perception of value. Like nothing is inherently more urgent or important. We might differ in terms of our priority in all of those dimensions on the same stimuli, right? So the perception of value is at the heart of why people make decisions about everything. And if it's at the heart of why people make decisions about everything, it would be very strange if somehow who they mate and date with would be somehow exempt from that, since it's such an important, huge part of most people's lives.
And ask any grandma or great grandma, or grandpa, who should I marry? And they will rattle off the most economic based ones and zeros, make sure he or she has this, make sure he or she has that, resources wise, temperament wise. They really break it down into digestible chunks of information. It's not some, nuanced, ambiguous thing of make sure they're a good person. Okay, but that's,
Well, sure,
yeah,
sure. And it's
how do you
also not
define?
as ambiguous because it wasn't really as much to do with love. Like, there's often the argument that my more economic or transactional view of relationships is like a consequence of capitalism. It's like the heart has been corrupted by gross materialism, and that's what's wrong with the world today. But these critics often fail to account for the fact that in every culture in the world, the advent of love marriages has come after industrialization. Like, in no country visited by industrialization does the advent, like, it's never the other way around. In more traditional societies where marriages are arranged, they're not arranged based on who likes each other the most. That might be taken into account as fathers or matchmakers dealt with the
Mm-hmm.
interests and personalities of the individuals involved, but it was not the basis for forming those unions. And it wasn't the basis of forming those unions because relationships up until very recently were grounded in necessity. It was very, very,
Yes.
very hard to live throughout most of human history. Most people who have ever lived have lived at a subsistence level. Billions of people continue to live that way today, that we might not want to look at that fact, right? And in conditions of necessity, like, whether you like it or not, you might need people to survive. And if you need people to survive, you find a way to get along. You find a way to deal with it because the consequences of not getting along are so dire that no one even really wants to think about it. It's just too anxiety provoking. Now, what generally happens is with the advent of industrialization, people, which is, in my opinion, on the whole, a very good thing, are liberated from the constraints of necessity and subsistence living. And we can see that in every culture on the planet, as GDP goes up, the number of children goes down. Marriage happens later in life. People are liberated from the necessity of forming unions and having marriages and having children because they now just do that increasingly because they want to. Now, making a decision out of necessity is very different from making a decision out of desire. Necessity has to do with, like, what's the right tool for the job, which is I have a 401k, I have a master's degree, I'm a responsible guy. That's necessity. But those things aren't very sexy. So they might not speak to desire, which is how people make decisions these days. And when there's not necessity and there's not desire, there is nothing. There is nothing. And that's typically what's happening. People, especially in developed countries, men and women don't technically need each other. Men need lots of women around to keep the population alive. Women need lots of men around to keep society running, basically. But, like, a man doesn't need a woman and a woman doesn't need a man. Like, either needed each other even like 2 generations ago in our grandparents' generation. So now they only get together almost like as a luxury, as a desire. And that means that you have to be and you also have to be very, very desirable in order to enact that relationship. Because given online dating and social media, where we're all swimming in one big ocean, somewhere in that sea of apparent infinite optionality are extremely attractive options. Like, somewhere out there is exactly what you're looking for. The issue is, so why settle for anything less, especially if you don't need to? So that's why relationships are only going to the very desirable men and women at this point.
Interesting. So to encapsulate, summarize everything you said, if you go to the more poor third world developing, you're going to see more need-based relationships.
Sure.
The more successful capitalistic first world, everyone is doing well, the riches are plenty, you're going to see more desire-based relationships. And I think that's what you and I are seeing in our world, is much more desire-based relationships. There was an anthropologist, Helen Fisher, who authored several books, and she basically pointed out that through all her research, she sees the one factor that determines whether or not a relationship, a marriage lasts long term, is how much they need each other. I
Mm-hmm.
need you to help raise this family, and I need you to help keep a roof over their head. I need you to help me in case I get sick. I need.
That's great.
As soon as we strip away need, it's
And
not
think
good.
about it. Think about some of the things that people lament about the end of marriages in today's day and age. Well, I'm not in love with you anymore. Well, like, what does that have to do with need or obligation or duty, et cetera? Nothing. But if the reason you got into the relationship to begin with was because you desired it, and that desire evaporates over time, then the fundamental criterion for why you're in that relationship no longer exists, and it's entirely justified to leave.
Mm-hmm.
If you enter into
Yeah,
relationships based on desire, then for better or for worse, your primary objective must be to maintain high levels of desire in your partner.
which takes a certain set of skills,
Mm-hmm.
know-how that I dare say most of us do not have.
I would
That's a
definitely
very
say
foreign
most
concept.
men don't have, and a lot of women don't
Yes.
either, but they can be learned. I like that you said they were skills. A lot of the complaints that I hear online are from guys that just say that they're inherently incapable because they're not 6'2". They don't have the six pack abs. And it's like that stuff helps to a certain extent, but it is absolutely not necessary to maintain high levels of desire.
Exactly. And you can point to, sir, I know this man over here who is slightly overweight and he's 5'2" and he kills it with the ladies. He is charming as hell, and every woman just loves being around him. That he's getting numbers left and right. And those men that you point to will say, uh, he's an anomaly. There's always going to be
Well, he's an anomaly because he's charming. Most men aren't.
because he has those skills, and most do not. I love that you say that. It's something you absolutely can learn. But I can try to sympathize with these poor men. When you're 55 years of age and freshly divorced, and you've been taught this is the way, that need based relationship is it. That's a template for success. And then suddenly somebody comes along, goes, wipes the table clean, and said, "Nope, it's gone. Now what else do you have?" They're just left being very, very angry and confused
It's a different
and
world.
ticked
Yeah,
off at the world.
I can understand
Yeah,
that.
it's a new world, a scary world.
It's like,
Um,
by analogy, if you, how would I put this? When I lived in San Francisco, I had an apartment, and the man who was living downstairs from me worked as a taxi driver, and that was his career since he was a young man, and he was probably in his late 50s, early 60s at this point. And he was being completely displaced by Uber and Lyft. And he was enraged by this. He would get drunk and scream well into the night and make threats against Uber. And he was a man who, for whatever reason, despaired of adapting. He had known one thing. His industry functionally disappeared, not overnight, but relatively quickly. And he didn't know how to respond. And a lot of guys might find themselves in that situation, but I'd like to suggest that you can teach an old dog new tricks. Like, as long as we're alive, we can keep learning and growing. There are things that we can do.
Absolutely. It's such a mental thing for a lot of men. And I've talked to the men who are able to make that switch, and they literally will say, the switch happened because I just decided to make it happen. I just decided I'm going to be that guy.
That's how
And
how it always happens.
that's how it always starts for everything, any competency, any kind of skill or whatever it is. I want to be that. I want to be a really good bricklayer. I'm going to go over that guy and find out how to be a good bricklayer. And I'm going to apprentice with him for whatever. That's what it takes. That level of stupid. I want to be that. That's where it
And
starts.
Epictetus made a really
But
great point, thousands of years ago, which is like, just because he could never be a bodybuilder because he was crippled in his leg, it didn't mean that he didn't try to take care of his health and to keep his body as functional and strong as he possibly could. Like, just because you can't be these top tier chads, which most guys won't ever be by definition, it doesn't mean that you cannot improve your skill set and get more of what you want with more attractive women, if that's what you're looking for.
But that mindset, that victim mindset, the old crabs in the bucket, everyone trying to pull each other down. And I saw that you talked to Chris Williamson about this on his podcast. It's a very real thing, this phenomenon of these men, mostly youngish men, saying this whole relationship thing is fruitless. Don't even try. It's hopeless. Don't even try. Dude, you're 5'9", don't even try. You're slightly overweight, don't even try. And when somebody within their group succeeds, starts crawling out of the bucket, so to speak, I got me a girl, I got a date next week, they will pull that man down. And I've seen it again and again on the internet. I'm married to the most beautiful woman ever, and we've been together for 7 years. Some man will say, everything's great, you guys are crazy. And they'll say, yeah, wait for year number 8. That's when things go to shit, my man.
Well, I mean,
She's
there is
going
a
to cheat
grain of
on you and
truth
divorce.
for that. It's like on some level, you don't ever get to coast in your relationship. Just like at a job, I can't show up today and just be like, I think I'm going to phone
Yep.
it in as a therapist. Like, I wouldn't have repeat customers. They would stop coming back. You know, if I did that often enough, I would think. It's like every day at your job, you have to show up and provide value as best you can. And if enough of those days are strung together where you're not doing that thing, you're going to be out of a job. In a
Yep.
relationship, you don't ever get to coast. And this is some things men often learn the hard way. They think they have a different conceptualization of, let's say, commitment and duty. They think that because they put the tux on and stood at the altar and said, I do once, like that's taken care of for the rest of their marriage and relationship. Because that's on some level how men approach duty. The president is sworn in once, and that's all that's necessary. If you need to be sworn in twice, what was wrong with the first time? Like, why was that not effective? Like, he did it once. We shouldn't have to do it again. Do you see? So I've already given you all of these things. That's another thing that men often learn doesn't work to their detriment, is like the game does not run on gratitude, as it were. Like everything that you've given a woman, and men are subject to giving their women a great deal, is irrelevant to secure future relations.
Yes. It's in my book, The Dead Bedroom Fix. I talked about often when a man is dumped or cheated on, one of the first things he will do is list all of what I call the provider type of skills that he has shown over the years. I got her that tennis bracelet that she wanted. I got her that car that she wanted. I bought that housekeeping service that she wanted. I bought I bought. I gave, and yet she still cheated on
After
me with a
all I
pool
did
man
for
or
her.
whatever.
Yep.
After all I did for her, he's like, that's not how it works. And I'm sorry if that's how you were taught. That's how it worked. You buy a woman's affection, you buy, and she will stick with you forever and ever, no matter what. It doesn't work
It
that way,
doesn't.
my friend. You put all your eggs in one basket. No, it's a balancing act. It's a skill. You need to learn how to play the game properly.
Yeah. I mean, it makes a kind of rational sense, is that, but it's generally not how it works. And that's because there are vast differences in how men and women in general, let's say, calculate value and what they go to relationships to get. If they wanted the same thing, it would be a lot easier, but potentially not as rewarding when it works.
Another quote here: the idea that all other things being equal, individuals will forego a better opportunity for a worse one is absurd.
Sure.
With that being said, let me pause that idea, because I also talk to a lot of men who, we have to qualify this. They are married to a woman who is objectively, in the eyes of everyone else around them, everyone says, really, her? She's got a lot of issues, a lot of childhood chaos and drama and mental and emotional issues and so forth, borderline this and that and everything else. And sure enough, the relationship blows up in his face because he discovered that she was having an affair with drug addict, felon, somebody that's really low on the totem pole as far as the mating game is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And he is shocked by this because everything has told him over the years that women only, go up in the ranks as far as men are concerned. She dropped you because this guy's obviously a better deal. Let me go get the better deal and the better deal. So when she dropped me for a homeless drug addict, this makes no sense. And I say, well, you're looking at it the wrong way. Obviously, if she was a very troubled individual, this was a lateral move for her. She's going to more her kind. She's always been this way. You've been blind to this for so many years, as you've been drunk in love with this woman and providing for her for so many years. So I could see where somebody may read something, the idea that individuals will forego a better opportunity for a worse one is absurd. Sometimes it happens.
I don't know. Maybe we need to get into the psychology of that person's perception. So
There you go.
there's a couple of things I would say to this. So first of all, while it might be true that you know some guys who are with, let's say, objectively questionable women, it might also be true that there's something objectively questionable about those men. The fact of the matter
Oh,
is
absolutely.
that secure, confident men don't end up in those sorts of relationships. They might meet those women, but
Bingo.
they don't stay with them because they don't tolerate
Bingo.
the treatment that they're receiving.
Mhm.
It's the same thing when women complain about like being involved with narcissists. It's like, yeah, there's some narcissistic men out there. It's true. But like, what left you vulnerable to a narcissist? Because a healthy, secure woman would have sniffed that out in the first few weeks and said, this doesn't feel right.
Mhm.
I'm out of here. So what was it about you that left you vulnerable to that particular seductive trap? And that's where you're not secure, and that's where you're not stable, and that's where you're not healed. So these are co-created situations. It's not like successful, awesome dudes end up with train wrecks of women generally. Like on the surface, they could be rich, they could even be famous, but internally, they haven't yet developed a robust sense of self and authentic confidence. So that's one thing that I would say.
Mhm.
The second thing I would
Mhm.
say is that value is not objective. That's something that I say over and over again in that book. Value only exists in the mind of the beholder. And it's the cat who decides what milk is good. That's a metaphor I use often on the channel. You might think you're putting out the most wholesome, rich cream for the neighborhood cat, but if that cat turns its nose up and goes over there, the cat is deciding that that milk is better. You can't just decide for the cat. That's one of the issues here. So if we put ourselves in that situation, it might be analogous to this, where same thing in the professional arena is that people will choose their overall best option. Now, if you're used to choosing jobs based on their income, you might be flabbergasted when somebody chose a job for a third of the income they could be making somewhere else. You would think that person is just crazy. That person just doesn't understand economics or whatever. No, it's that person doesn't understand the perception of value, because there absolutely will be other components to that job that in that perceiver's mind are more valuable than the additional money that they would earn at that other opportunity. This could mean that it's a lower stress environment. It can mean that they're allowed to work from home, or it's a very short commute, or they're more flexible with the hours. All of those things might actually be more valuable than making an additional quantum of money. Do you see? And because they're perceived by that individual as being more valuable, he or she will make that decision. And if you're looking at that decision and thinking, what was this person thinking? You haven't understood it yet, because people generally make sense. Unless they truly are psychotic, which most people aren't, they're actually making rational decisions. And what I've discovered as a therapist, because I talk to all kinds of people, from all walks of life, and sometimes people present and they're really baffling. It's like, I don't quite understand why they would think that, or why would they choose to do this. And then you hear more of their story and it's like, oh yeah, now it makes sense. So if you're baffled by why people choose the way they do, you don't know enough yet. But once you know enough about how they perceive value, how their value algorithm was trained given their childhood experiences, which is something I go into in the book, then their decisions make absolute clarity. They're completely rational.
Mm-hmm. From their
They may
perspective, it
not be in
makes
their best
absolute sense to them.
interests, but they're completely rational given
Mm-hmm.
their subjectivity, their perception of value. That's my
Yeah,
counter argument.
in that example of the wife who runs off with the objectively, felon, drug addict, whatever, if you really sat her down and asked why, he made me feel a certain way that I haven't felt in years with
Bingo.
husband.
And what that woman is basically saying is that feeling, which let's just pull this apart a little bit, because sometimes people can be married for 10, 15 years. They're now in their 40s. The enthusiasm, the excitement, the limerence have faded in the relationship. Maybe the sex is going, and they're really honestly looking into the future and saying, is this going to be the rest of my life? Am I never going to have sex again? Am I never going to feel alive again? Am I never going to feel that kind of excitement of touch and presence and connection? And that's hard for a lot of people to face. I mean, think about all the twists and turns that people do as they're older to maintain some vestiges of their youth and that vitality. They will spend tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to feel young again. So let's not diminish or minimize the value of that feeling of being alive, of feeling desired, of surrendering to that kind of exuberant connection can be extremely valuable to certain people, especially if those elements are missing in their marriage or their primary relationship.
And for a lot of people stuck in a long-term relationship, and the comfort and safety and everything else settles in, and the limerence and puppy dog love feelings fade, when they get a minute taste of the old feelings, they're done. They're off to the
It can
races.
be the case.
And it's a very addictive thing. And I will not give this up for anything. And they will put blinders on to the world around them. They will chase their drug, whether the drug is a literal drug or whether it's a affair or whatever it may be, some kind of destructive behavior, but it makes them feel alive again. That's everything.
And the thing about one of the real privileges about my job is that I am able to talk to people about their real thoughts and feelings. And I'm like thousands of people's secret keeper. Like I know really what's going on inside of a lot of people. They don't tell me the full unvarnished truth, of course, but they tell me more of the truth than maybe they tell anybody else in their lives. And I am at this point, there's a fundamental humility to being a therapist that tends to creep in, which is that you just learn not to judge people as harshly or at all, because like you can kind of understand where they're coming from. Like I can't tell you whether that woman who is tempted in that way by the promise of feeling alive again, whether she should leave or she should stay. But I can understand both decisions. And anybody who can't believe that she would do something is willfully avoiding trying to understand why that might be the case.
To empathize. God forbid we empathize with the,
well, if I was the guy who was left for the homeless addict, let's be real, man, it would be hard for me to empathize with the woman. It would take a long time. It would take some years. I hear
from those men every day. I hear from those men every day, and they do not want to try and understand why it happened. All they want to do is lay blame and to fix their pain, make their pain stop, basically, because they're traumatized.
And understood, man, it's not the time for understanding. It's the time to stop the bleeding. Like understanding sometimes comes later. Sometimes you have to run out of the burning house and then understand why it was set on fire. Like, don't do it the other way around. That's stupid.
Yeah, very well put. Very well put. In the book, one more time, the book is The Value of Others, Understanding the Economic Model of Relationships to Get and Keep More of What You Want in the Sexual Marketplace, Dr. Orion Taraban. Check him out on, where can folks find out more about you? YouTube, Psychacks, where else?
Yeah, Psychacks on YouTube is the primary way that most people find me. It has a pretty big following at this point. I have social medias, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. They're growing, but I just started them recently. I have a website, oriontarabanpsyd.com, where you can find out more about my various services, including personal consultations, which I do with folks, men and women all over the world. And I have my book, The Value of Others, which you've rattled off a number of times in this conversation. Thank you for that. And that's available on several different platforms, Amazon, but also on Spotify, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, Apple, iTunes, pretty much wherever you want to get your thing, you can probably find it there.
Very good. Excellent. Dr. Orion Taraban, thank you so much for doing this.
Ralph, this was great. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yes, I'm a big, big fan of yours and wish you continued success. And let's do this again sometime.
Sounds fun. Thanks for having me on.
All right, brother. Thank you so much.